the two congressmen here when they arrive. Welcome to Conversations with Conservative. I'm Mike Gonzalez, the Senior Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. If you're going to tweet about this event, the hashtag, be nice, and the hashtag is hashtag CWC113. If I may ask that when you ask a question, you mention, you give us your name, the organization you work for, and that there's a question mark at the end of the brief question. Why don't I kick it off to the two gentlemen who are here. Obviously, the border situation is the most pressing news issue that we have right now. There have been calls already to cut off aid to the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, including the already diminished military aid that we give them so they can help themselves. Do you have a view on this?
I'll let the border guy talk first. Randy?
Well, Randy Weber from Texas. I was the vice chair of the Texas Borders Committee my last term in the Texas legislature, so I know what it's like down on the border. And by the way, I will be there this weekend to survey the border firsthand. I did file a bill that does away with foreign aid immediately for those four countries, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Mexico, because they're not helping us stem the tide. Now, I don't know how many of y'all saw this, but last week, might have been, I don't remember the exact date of the press conference, the President of Mexico and the President of Guatemala press release had an agreement that Mexico would not hamper those who were coming up through Guatemala on their way to the United States of America, that they would actually give them kind of a safer passage, if you will. So Mexico understands that there's a lot of this going on, and rather than help us stem that tide, they're actually aiding, I would say, aiding and abetting in that human trafficking. So I filed that bill. Currently has about 11 or 12 co-sponsors. It does not impact, the bill does not impact the war on drugs and the war on human trafficking. It exempts those funds, okay? So, yeah, I think that they're turning a blind eye toward what's going on.
And that's a very good question, Mike. And what I'm hearing from constituents, probably very common to many members, very upset about the situation. But at the end of the day, this is the President's border crisis. I believe it was his statements and his encouragement that has led to this humanitarian crisis. And we're looking for the President to actually tell us how he's going to solve that crisis. But suggesting amnesty or proposing that, as he has done numerous times, as well as his executive order right before the 2012 election, I think has created this crisis. So, Mr. President, where's your leadership here? This is a crisis that I believe you have precipitated by your actions, as well as your inactions of failure to secure the border.
And Mike, if I may, let me add, I'm sorry, Jim, I failed to mention that, you know, we're actually having a mailer come out in our district that says it is time to put America first. The President is the face of the border problem, and perhaps that's why he didn't show his face on the Texas border last week. I want to make that point.
Very good. Why don't we go to the floor right now and see if anybody has any questions? This lady right here. This microphone coming.
Good morning. Thank you for having this today. My question is, I'm Penny Starr with CNS News, by the way. In 2006, Congress enacted the Secure Fence Act that mandated DHS build a double border fence with a road, lighting, cameras, and sensors from 15 miles west of Laredo all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. This is exactly where the border crisis is now. The mandate for the double fence was gutted by language inserted in a continuing resolution by Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson. The fence was never built. Should the fence have been built? Should Congress mandate Obama build it now? Thank you.
I'm sorry, you said Penny Starr? Yeah, hi, Penny. Can Congress mandate that the President do anything? I mean, he has ignored the law over and over and over again. That's why I said earlier that he is the face of the border problem. That perhaps that's why he didn't show his face. You have a lot of different issues at play here. A lot of the landowners along the Texas border don't necessarily want the fence built on their property. You've got the Big Bend National Park there, which has some rules that agents can't go in there. Those rules need to be changed. You've got sectors, Governor Perry, I was down on the in a DPS briefing 4 years ago, I think. This has been coming for some time. Governor Perry was on TV here the other day saying that there's different sectors where there's some really hotbeds of traffic. In those areas, a fence would make sense, but there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles along the almost 1,200-mile Texas border where a double fence, for example, wouldn't make sense. And so there are areas. Can we get this president to act? This president's been acting all right, but not in, I would argue, not in what I would call as a way that serves the best interests of this country. That's why I think he needs to own this problem. He owns the problem, and it's time to put America first. Can we get him to act? Am I in favor of giving him $3.7 billion? He's not doing his job now, Penny. Do I want to give him $3.7 more billions to not do his job more? I don't think so.
Well, since you brought it up, the supplemental appropriation, why don't we go through, see what your comments are on that. Senator, Congressman Labrador, you have any views on the supplemental appropriation, the $3.7 billion?
I apologize. I'm sick today, so I have a really bad cold. But the supplemental appropriation, I think, needs to be treated differently and separately from the problem that we have at the border. And the supplemental appropriation, the president actually has the tools and the ability right now to and the money to deal with a lot of the issues that we have at the border, and we need to decide what we're going to do with the money. But there's specific things that we must do to fix the surge of young minors to the border. The first thing we need to do is change the 2008 law. I think that has to. That was the intent of the law, was not to help the children that are coming to the border right now, but it was to help children that were sex trafficking cases. So that's number one. Number two thing that we need to do is try to figure out what we can do with the National Guard. We got to figure out if there's any way that they could help in some humanitarian fashion. If you listen to the Border Patrol agents, they're saying that 70% of their time is being spent on humanitarian needs instead of actual law enforcement needs. And I think we should let the Border Patrol agents do their law enforcement job, and then maybe use the National Guard and other groups to deal with the humanitarian needs that we have down there. We also need to figure out what to do with the kids that are coming to the border that are gang affiliated. We have a major problem with gang affiliation, and many of these kids are suspected of gang affiliation. Right now the law does not allow mandatory detention for those children or those kids, and they're not really kids. They're young men and women in the between 15 and 19 years old who have gang participation in their countries, or we have suspected gang participation. So there's a lot of things that we could be doing, and I'm afraid that if we get lost in this debate of whether it's going to be $3.7 billion or $1.7 billion or whatever the number is, we're going to allow the president to get away with what he's getting away with right now, which is a lack of responsibility at the border. He created this problem. He keeps saying that it's because of the 2008 law. Well, if you look at the history, the law passed in 2008. We didn't have this problem in 2009. We didn't have it in 2009. We didn't have it in 2010. We didn't have it in 2011. It became a problem in 2012 when the president decided to, through fiat, do DACA. And that's what has created the problem, that allowed the drug cartels to actually advertise in their local papers that if you get to the United States, you're going to get a free pass. This is a creation of the president's own doing, and I think he has the authority and the ability to actually fix this problem today if he changes his attitude about the border.
Anyone else? Why don't we go back there? Yes, Gene, right there. No. Can you put that up? Yeah.
I can just yell.
Yes.
My voice does carry. Can you provide some comments on the reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank? What kind of impact it would have on not having this bank have on your particular districts? I'm done with my question now.
I would just say I'm for letting it wind down, not for reauthorizing it. I think, let the marketplace work. We are hearing from some folks. I think probably all members are hearing from some folks in their district about the issue, but it seems to me the market works a lot better than folks here in Washington trying to dictate where we're going to loan money and how we're going to do it. So I'm for letting it wind down. All the loans and the contracts that are in place would continue, but once they're complete, then you move on. One thing I do think the American people are looking at is they think this town. I said this at the conference a couple weeks ago. They think this town is rigged against them. There are all kinds of bailouts that go for big corporations, big business, and all kinds of folks who don't necessarily work, who get all kinds of help in our social safety net, and they're looking for folks to represent them. And I think this would be one way we could show that we're going to let a program actually expire and an agency actually shut down. Imagine that. So I hope that's the direction we head. I think there's some good folks in our conference who feel the same way, like Congressman Ryan from Wisconsin, Congressman Henschling, the chairman of the Financial Services Committee from Texas, and lots of others. So I'm hoping that's the direction we head.
I share those sentiments, Jessica, but specifically in Kansas, in my district, Kansans are tired of some folks in Washington deciding who's going to get a loan and who's not. And they think the game is rigged, and I tend to agree with them. Bigger folks here in town, the special interests, that's who really wants the bank from what I've heard, and continue that. The small businesses, generally there's not many in my district impacted by that. But at the end of the day, do you want someone in Washington, D.C. making those decisions, or will you let average, ordinary Americans and their bankers make those particular decisions about the future? This is, I think, a make-or-break time for the Republican Party here in Congress. Who we're going to stick up with. We're going to stick up for Wall Street or Main Street, and with Ex-Im Bank, it's pretty clear. And I'm going to stick with folks back home that say, hey, let's have less power in Washington, not more control over our lives.
Gentleman right here. Is there a microphone?
J.C. Derrick with World Magazine. Going back to the border issue, Congressman James Lankford has said that he believes the administration is reading that 2008 law incorrectly. He said it's a novel interpretation. So he doesn't actually support repealing the law. He thinks that Congress should clarify it to make sure that he doesn't widen the scope of, the meaning to include all the people who are currently coming to the border. Can you comment on that?
Well, that's why I said change the law. I didn't say repeal the law. I think parts of the 2008 law are good. What I think the administration is broadly interpreting it. If you look at what the law was part of a sex trafficking bill, and it was supposed to protect minor children who were coming to the United States through sex trafficking rings. I do think the law is a little bit overbroad, and I think we can do some minor tweaks to the law to change it, but I don't think anybody's advocating repealing the 2008 law and it entirely, because the big bill that it came from was something that I think everybody agreed needed to happen, which was to protect children from sex trafficking.
If I may, JC, let me follow up on that. In Texas, we believe that everything's bigger and better, and we like it that way. Like a lot of those records that we hold, producing the most oil in the country, and so on and so forth. But one of the records that we don't like is that we have 25% of human trafficking comes through Texas. And that's a record that we don't want. So I think the law was aimed at victims of human trafficking, like Representative Labrador said. We need to change that. There was an internal memo, I think it was the DHS, that 70% of those coming up here recently amongst the UACs are wanting sanctuary up here rather, and they're bogus claims, up to 70% of them. So they're using our law against us, if you will, in that regard. Now, let me also add that as Vice Chairman of the Borders Committee in Texas, the DPS informed us that 70 Eastern Religious Sects, S-E-C-T-S, 70 Eastern Religious Sects are coming across our southern border. We don't know who's here. So the border is a problem. We do need to tweak that law, like Royal was saying, because it's not being used for the original intent. Do we want to protect the victims of human trafficking? Absolutely. But I think that law is being misinterpreted and misapplied, and even their own internal memo said so.
And something else the administration is doing is, for example, the law was supposed to protect unaccompanied minors, and they're applying it to accompanied minors who are with their parents. I mean, that alone would take care of a large number of the people that are coming to our borders. So what you have right now is you have the drug dealers and the mules and everybody else are going in one direction. The children, unaccompanied children, and the accompanied children with their families are going into the hands of Border Patrol. And the Border Patrol is treating both of those groups the same. The law actually allows them to treat the groups separately. Even under the current law, the unaccompanied children are treated one way and the accompanied children are supposed to be processed with their parents. And this administration is not doing that. So there's a lot of things this administration could do. They have refused to enforce the law, and they sent a clear message to Central America that we have an open borders policy. They keep saying that that's not true, but that was the only message that could have been sent from the actions of this administration. And I think that's why I'm encouraging the administration to actually take some responsibility.
JC, I'd like to add on that as well and point out Chairman Goodlatte has done an excellent job of pointing out the at least 9 tools and responsibilities the President has in order to solve his border crisis. And attempting to blame that on others, that seems to be part and parcel for this administration. But at the end of the day, the President has the full responsibility, and I believe the current tools, if he's willing to use those. So, and that's probably why he didn't want to visit the border, because it makes brings it right to the face of all Americans that, Mr. President, need to do your job here.
John Gizzi. Right here.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, gentlemen. Obviously, last week the world was rocked with the revelations about National Security Agency eavesdropping in Germany being greater than one thought. And certainly some of us who saw Chancellor Merkel and the President in the Rose Garden earlier in the summer thought their remarks then had smoothed over the earlier Snowden revelations. My question is this: have you seen a noticeable change in attitude among your colleagues in the Congress toward the NSA and perhaps calls for greater oversight? Have the revelations changed anything?
Yeah, we had the vote, the Massey Lofgren Amendment, which passed 3 weeks ago. And my guess is many of the folks up here, I know I supported it. My guess is most of the folks up here did. So yeah, the Fourth Amendment's the Fourth Amendment. We take that seriously, and I think you're seeing a renewed focus from members of Congress on that, in ways we can respect, understand the need for national security, but do it in a way that respects the Constitution.
Because that similar amendment missed by 12 votes last time.
Anyone else? Okay, that gentleman right here, second row.
Matthew Ogden with EIR. As you know, Sarah Palin has authored several editorials over the last week calling for the immediate filing of impeachment against President Obama, and this has exploded quite a debate, including last week. Speaker Boehner was confronted several times with this fact, to which he said, "I disagree." He was also confronted with the fact that many members of his own Republican caucus here on the Hill also support the impeachment of Obama. One of the violations of the Constitution which Palin cited was going to war in Libya without congressional approval, and the events in Benghazi that followed that, including the cover-up. And I know that Congressman Massey has co-sponsored HCR 3, Walter Jones's bill, saying if the Congress goes to war without congressional approval, that is an impeachable high crime and misdemeanor. But as Palin said, the time for impeachment has come. She said the arguments against it, waiting for the midterms, saying the Senate Democratic majority won't vote for it, are all false arguments. So I'd like to know where the members on the panel stand on impeachment, and if anybody here would file an impeachment resolution.
I would not. I don't think it's gotten to the level of impeachable offenses yet. I believe that Sarah Palin, who has given us some good information on some issues, doesn't have the burden of leadership right now, and it's really easy for her to go on Fox News and make statements that she doesn't have to be accountable to anybody but herself, and she's free to do that. That's why we have a free press and we have freedom of all these different things that we have. But the reality is that impeachment is a political process. And if you go to the American people, I don't think the American people would agree that the president has committed, as a whole, in general, they don't believe that the president should be impeached. But they do believe that Republicans should stand as a check and a balance against this president. They don't agree with this agenda. So, no, I would not file articles of impeachment at this time. I do think we need to start looking at some of these other administration officials a little bit more closely, and the ones who have actually come to Congress and lied to Congress. I think we need to start looking at the IRS commissioner a little bit more closely and start deciding what we're going to do with some of those lower level administration officials. But I am not sure that we should even be talking about impeachment at this time. And I know some of my colleagues disagree, but I would disagree with one of your statements that a lot of Republicans think that we should do impeachment. I don't think that's accurate. I think it's a small number of Republicans. So I don't want the media to misrepresent that.
I believe I'm the only member up here who actually has voted to impeach a president. I don't know, Mr. Duncan, were you here? I voted to impeach.
Are you ready to go round two?
I voted to impeach President Clinton every chance I could, is my line down in my district. So I think it's debatable. I certainly think the president has gone out of his way to not enforce some of the laws that the Congress thinks he should be enforcing. Impeachment is for high crimes and misdemeanors. The Constitution doesn't really define what that is. So as Raul just said, there is a political element to what a high crime and misdemeanor is. But having gone through the impeachment process with President Clinton, as a practical matter, it wouldn't be possible, even if we made the decision today to do it, because of the complexity of the procedure and the need for real regular order and due process. If you're going to impeach a president of the United States, you need to do it right. And it's already July, and we're going to, we're even if the speaker, called us back and did all sorts of extraordinary things with the schedule, I don't think you could do it as a practical matter. And you certainly are not going to get a conviction, a two-thirds conviction in the Senate. We've never convicted a president. We've impeached two. I don't believe Clinton even got a majority against him. I could be wrong on that. But President Andrew Johnson, after the Civil War, was failed to be impeached by one vote. So the thing to do is to hold the president accountable through the oversight and investigation arm of the House and the Senate, and to make sure the American people, who are the ultimate judges, know what the facts are. And I believe I'm correct in saying that the president's approval rating is at an all-time low for his presidency. So you give the voters the facts, and they'll come to their own conclusions. But at this point in time, I don't think it would be a good use of the Congress's remaining time in this Congress to start the impeachment procedure.
Let me just add this. Good or bad, like it or not, there's a political element to everything that we do here in the Congress. And I like Sarah Palin, and I like all these the people that I have seen call for some kind of impeachment action. But every political analyst almost that has really looked at this and has said that nothing would fire up the base of the Democrats more than an impeachment action, and also that it, even perhaps more importantly, that it would turn off some of the independents who are right now leaning our way. And so if you want to help the Democrats keep control of the Senate, this would be one way to do it, to start an impeachment action. And so I don't think any of us up here, though, want to do that. We've got things going our way right now. I remember a month after the after the 2008 election. Well, in fact, come to think of it, I did see an article either today or yesterday that said that the Democrats were using this impeachment talk to gin up their contributions. But I remember a month after the 2008 election, we always, after all these elections, I read it after the 1964 election when I was in high school. I read it after the 92 election. I read it after the 2008 election that the demographic trends were going against the Republicans and the Republican Party was dying or on its way out. Senator Howard Baker, after the 2008 election, wrote an article or a column in the Washington Post, and he said, those who say the Republican Party is dying are wrong. The Republicans will come back stronger than ever, because the Obama administration will either overreach or underachieve or both. Well, they've done both, and when they're what's the old saying? When somebody's shooting themselves in the foot, we shouldn't take their gun away from them, and so we need to talk about a lot of other things other than impeachment at this point.
And nobody wants a President Joe Biden.
Okay. Okay, order, please.
Well, the one thing I would just say, Congressman Barton talked about the president needs to be held accountable. Right now, the courts are starting to do that. And so I support what the Speaker's doing with the suit that he's bringing. I mean, you think about the last two decisions, 9-0 on the recess appointments, 5-4 on religious liberty, the Hobby Lobby decision. Right now, we do need to hold this president accountable. Right now, the courts are beginning to do that, and the Speaker of the House is moving forward with the cause of action. I think that's right on target.
And I'll add a couple things on this as well. What Governor Palin is mentioning is what I hear amongst many Americans, particularly conservatives, just concerned, ever increasingly concerned about the lawlessness of this administration. And how do you respond to that? I say as a member of Congress, we do our constitutional duty, and we're doing that right now today on the House floor. For the first time since I've been up here, we're actually going to discuss and go after the IRS and their spending. And I am sick and tired of members of Congress, President Company accepted, that say, hey, it's somebody else's job. It's our job. We can hold this president accountable through the power of the purse. We just have to use it. And we are starting to do that. And I know when I see that frustration, Americans would like a home run so we can bring this guy under constitutional control. I get that. But it is a tough process. It's a political process. And finally, we have a chance on the IRS today. And we're going to continue to do that. I wish we'd go through every appropriations. We did that last week with a crazy regulation coming out of the EPA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We do that through the appropriations process, and we can do that in the House, and we're finally making a little progress on that.
Okay, because
Mike, before you run, let me wait on that. The president deserves to be impeached, plain and simple. But because of the reasons that my colleagues up here said, we've got so much on our plate that it's not practical. We don't have the Senate. Yes, he deserves to be impeached. But because of all the phony scandals that he calls them, I mean, our country is in a mecca of behest, and we've got so many things that need our attention. We do need regular order. We do need to do this methodically and correctly and do it in the right way. So I don't think it's practical that we impeach him right now, but he definitely deserves it.
Okay, this young lady right here, because there are many questions, so please, I'd like to ask her to keep the questions brief. Right here.
Lauren Fox with U.S. News and World Report. I just wanted to ask, at what point in this process are the Democrats being looped in terms of border security and in terms of the $3.7 billion that the president's requested? I know that there are a lot of Democrats who have been vehemently opposed to changing or tinkering with that 2008 law. So I'm curious about how optimistic any of you are that anything will get done or any money will be allocated to this crisis.
I don't know. I don't know that any of us are on the working group that the speakers put together. Well, I mean, I know I'm not. I don't know my colleagues. So I'm not sure to the extent that there's any bipartisan talks going on right now.
I do know that the minority leader, Ms. Pelosi, has been to the border. She held a number of very visible political press conferences on the border. So she is, to some extent, kind of created her own loop. I wasn't here at the beginning when the question first came up, but if I were to have a dialogue with my Democratic colleagues in the House, the first question I would ask them is, do they think the president's enforcing the current law? I think most neutral observers would say no. The second thing is, if you think what's being done, where you almost openly invite children to come into this country without any authorization, would you vote to just repeal all the immigration quotas that we have in law and just make us an open country? Because that's, if you don't enforce the law we have, the practical effect is we're telling the world, forget waiting your turn to come to America. Get here any way you can and we'll let you in, especially if you're under 18 years of age. That's just not acceptable. I'm a moderate on immigration reform. I'd like to see at some point in time some substantive reforms to immigration, and I've got a bill that I'm going to be at least putting in public for draft purposes in the near future. But letting hundreds of thousands of children, however you define a child, accompanied or unaccompanied, just literally turn themselves in is just not acceptable. We have got to, there may be a handful that have some legitimate reason to seek asylum in this country, but I'd say 99.9% could easily be sent back to their country of origin, and it would be totally within our law and the law of the country that they're coming from. So I think we have got to enforce this, the sooner the better. And the president's request for funding, it can't have too many Republican votes, and it probably doesn't have a whole lot of Democrat votes.
Well, and when you say nothing is being done, I can tell you that no department or agency has received nearly the increases over the past 10 years that that have been given to the border officials, and the money is already there to take these children back. Now it may not be there to house them for some long or indefinite period of time, but the money is there to do what needs to be done to enforce the law, because they've had these whopping increases both in money and in personnel over the last several years.
You know, and I agree, the money is there. He has the money that he needs to enforce the law, and if you think about it, I don't think I've seen any publication talk about this, but on May 10th of 2011, the president went to El Paso and he mocked Republicans, and he said that the Republicans keep asking me to increase enforcement, and he said his own words were that they're next going to ask me to build a higher fence and then a moat and then alligators in the moat. If you remember, he was mocking Republicans. And that's what happens when a president of the United States decides to play games with border security instead of actually enforcing border security, is that you have a rush to the border. We warned him about this. We told him that he kept playing games with this, that you were going to have, he was leaving an open invitation to all people of the world to rush to the border, because everybody would understand that if you made it to the United States, you were going to be granted some sort of amnesty. And that's exactly what's happening right now. He mocked us a year and a half ago, and now he's claiming that there's nothing that he can do to stem the tide. He can actually do something immediately. Rick Perry has asked him to deploy the National Guard. He refuses to do that. The National Guard could be deployed tomorrow. He doesn't need any additional funds for that. And if he does need additional funds, then come deploy the National Guard and come to the Congress and ask us to give him money for that specific thing. But instead of for enforcement functions, he's asking for money just so he can build housing for these people that are coming to the border. And I don't think that's what we should be doing.
I think everybody knows this, but these children are not evading arrest. They are turning themselves in. They're coming across in buses, and at least anecdotally, I was told that earlier this week 2 plane loads came to El Paso. They're not trying to get away. They're turning themselves in. They think that they've come to the promised land. And so this is not an issue of controlling the border. This is an issue of these people being told that they're almost have an invitation to come to the United States.
Well, and sadly, too, let me add, I've been all over the Texas border in the last 10 years. It is an issue of national security because of the 70 Eastern Religious Sects, SECTS, that I mentioned. The drug cartel is so brazen, they have T-shirts made up that says Gulf Drug Cartel. They walk around in Gulf Drug Cartel T-shirts, okay? The same network that moves these children across the border is the same network that's bringing in the drugs. They're the same network that is capturing some of these young girls and pressing them into the human sex trade. They're the same cartel that has been making contracts with some of the Al-Qaeda and some of the others from the eastern nations that say they can get them into America. Unfortunately, one of the things that the president hasn't done, he could do, if you go down Highway 77 out of Corpus Christi in Texas, the first Border Patrol interdiction point that you get to, checkpoint, is like 50 miles inland. Now let that sink in. Texas has 1,170 or 80 miles of border with Mexico. And on Highway 77, coming up from Brownsville into Corpus Christi, it's 50 miles inland. So the president could move the National Guard down on the border. The president could direct the Border Patrol to move closer to the border and interdict some of this stuff. It is a matter of national security.
And the other issue that we haven't addressed is much of the Rio Grande Valley is publicly owned land. And right now, because of federal regulations and federal law, Border Patrol is not even allowed to patrol in those areas. That's something else. That's something that Rob Bishop has been talking about for years. He has a bill to fix that problem, and the Democrats in this administration refuse to fix that problem. So to the question, you should ask the Democrats, are they willing to actually fix all of these problems that are preventing us from actually enforcing our laws? I would bet that most of them would be willing to do it, and especially at a moment of crisis like right now.
Let me address Lauren's question. There was about the Democrats being looped in. Well, President of the United States, this is his crisis. But based on what I'm reading, it looks like it'd be pretty unlikely any Democrat in a tough reelection effort is going to invite the president to help with that effort. And I think it's almost impossible for me to fathom any Democrat in a tough reelection race would ever show up with the president at this border.
Hi, I'm Cindy Sain with the Voice of America. Senator Cornyn of Texas and Representative Cuellar are introducing a measure which would alter the 2008 law and would treat all children the same. Could you weigh in on that? Could you support that? And would you make support for any bill and any funding dependent on changing that 2008 law?
I think Representative Salmon has the same bill here in the House.
They're a little different.
Slightly different, but I'm looking at Senator Cornyn's, but I've actually co-sponsored Representative Salmon's bill.
As have I. You heard me say earlier, it is time to put America first. And you're talking about what you're describing, Cindy, is OTMs other than Mexicans, where they treat those differently. And so how about OTAs other than Americans? Why don't we make this about American kids and doing what's right for our country? We can't afford to supply money and housing and all these things for people who just want to come here willy-nilly because the president says come. Again, he needs to own this problem. It ought to be about America. And I'm a co-sponsor of Salmon's bill as well. I haven't looked at Cornyn and Cuellar's. As I said earlier, I'm going to be down on the border this coming weekend. And so I think they're on the right track. We need to treat all children the same. We need to treat them civilly, humanely. I mean, I like to think of us as a Christian nation, for Pete's sake. But I also think we need to put America first and make this about American kids.
Right here.
Hi, Jeremy Peters from the New York Times. You look at some of the protests that are happening down on the border and in towns north of the border where a lot of these immigrants are possibly going to be sent. Some of it has been understandably impassioned. Some of it's been downright ugly. And I wonder what you think when you look at some of these protests and you see people sending their dirty underwear to these illegal children. You see Glenn Beck being excoriated for sending them food and toys. Is that constructive?
But it's also, there's a level of frustration in America that the government is ineffective in in protecting our sovereignty. And I think we have to take that seriously. I do not condone any of that behavior, but I think if we ignore what those people are complaining about, which is to see a bunch of, hundreds of thousands of people just rushing to the border, and that we're not going to do anything about it. And if we don't take that seriously in Washington, D.C., it's going to create an even bigger problem that might not be able to be contained. So we better take it seriously soon instead of complaining about it like you seem to be doing. We actually need to actually do something about it and make sure that these people feel safe in their homes, safe in their communities, and that they can feel that they can trust the Congress to actually get things done on the border issue.
And Jeremy, let me answer that question. In my district, down in the Galveston area, a city, League City, passed a resolution that said they would not accept the housing of any of the UACs or illegals in League City. And I'm told, I haven't seen the actual document, but I'm told that Galveston County Commissioner's Court did the same thing because they are frustrated. Like Raul just said. They're very frustrated. They're very concerned. Is it constructive? If that's the way the American people need to make their voice known, it is constructive. They're standing up because they do believe that this president doesn't enforce the current laws and doesn't protect our border and our sovereignty. And so they're very frustrated by that. Now, Pete Olson, my good friend in Congress, just to the north of my district, has filed a bill that says the federal government cannot house these UACs or illegals in local communities without their assent, without their cooperation. So you're seeing a level of frustration all across America, starting with some of the cities and local municipalities. I think one of the things that you're probably referring to, Jeremy, is the event that happened in California, and I forget the name of the town, Murrieta, does that sound right? Okay, and so you're going to see those kinds of things. But yes, the American people are very frustrated. When I go back to Congressman Uleskamp's comments about he can't see any of the Democrats wanting this president to show up at the border to help because he owns this problem, and so people are very frustrated and they're making their voices known, and that's a good thing.
All right, that lady.
Hi.
Yes.
Is this on?
Yes.
I'm Susan Cornwell with Reuters. I wondered how you see this meeting this afternoon with Jeb Hensarling on the Export-Import Bank. Those of you who are going, are you taking in some kind of message to that meeting? Are you worried that Hensarling might go along with reauthorizing the bank with reform? And also, I wondered, the other thing that people discuss is the possibility that this would be put on the CR, reauthorizing the bank would be put on the CR. And I wonder how strongly you feel about it. If that happened, would you vote against the CR? Thank you.
This is going to be a test of leadership. We heard from members of leadership, some members of leadership, that they are against reauthorizing the EXIM Bank. So let's see if they put on the floor anything that actually authorizes the EXIM Bank. I think Jeb Hensarling has a good plan. I actually trust him on this issue. If he thought that there was a reform package that he could agree with, I don't know that I would disagree with him, since he seems to be the expert on this issue. So I will follow his lead on this issue, but I think most of us understand that the American people are frustrated. When you go and you talk to people in my town hall meetings, they tell you that they're sick and tired of the government bailing out big corporations and people who are not contributing. And they say it again and again and again. And they get frustrated when they talk about big government and big business. There's an incestuous relationship here in Washington, D.C., and some people believe that there's no difference between the two parties, that both parties are always going to defend big government, and both parties are always going to defend big business. And this is a test of leadership and a test for the Republican Party. Are we, once in our lifetime, are we going to be willing to actually let an agency just end that doesn't need to be in business, that everybody who looks at this issue understands that this agency does not need to exist? So let's see if we're willing to actually stand up for what we believe in.
I would just say last fall, Harry Reid said at least a bazillion times that that he wanted a clean CR. So now to have a corporate welfare XM bank language put on a CR absolutely makes no sense. So I don't see that happening. I hope that doesn't happen. And for all the reasons Raul said, we'll see what Mr. Hensarling's plan is for winding down this XM bank.
There's a lot of questions. Can you gentlemen stay for another 15 minutes, or should we wind it down with two more questions? Two more? Okay. Okay, this lady right here with the glasses.
Hi, Elise Foley with Huffington Post. Excuse me. I just wanted to clarify on the border funding. I know you've talked, some of you, about things Obama could do with his current money. Does that mean you're opposing supplemental funding that in general, or do you think that it should deal with only enforcement and deterrence rather than HHS? And should those funds, if you support them, be offset?
At least I'll say I'm still looking for a chance to sit down, I guess, with all his details. But when you have a member of Congress that attempts to do his duty to investigate what HHS is doing with the current funds, like my colleague Jim Bridenstine, and is told to go away, it strains credibility of Congress to say, hey, we'll just give them some more money. Clearly, they're not open and not transparent about what they're doing now. And I don't know if you've reported that. I know a few other media outlets have reported that. But again, Jim Bridenstine was forbidden, not allowed to enter and see how current funds were being used. And that's part and parcel for this administration. And but again, this is the president's border crisis. He has sufficient funds, in my opinion, to take care of the crisis he created. Now, he might have to move some slush funds around at the HHS, but I think there's plenty of funds there to handle this situation.
Elise, the short answer is yes. That means I'm opposed to the funds that the president is offering up or wants from us. I met this morning with Brian Horowitz, Special Agent in Charge of Homeland Security in the Houston area, who has from Nacogdoches all the way down to the border. We actually looked. I actually have a breakdown. I'm sorry I don't have it with me. Governor Perry has been on the national news saying that it's only 4% of that money actually goes to what I would call hardening the border, if you will, protecting the border. It's actually a little more than that. We've done some digging into it. Again, I don't have the figures. I think it's somewhere between probably 8 and 11%, but it is a tiny, tiny part. And so I'm not in favor, as I said earlier, of giving this president, who owns this problem, who created this problem, who's not doing his job, any more money to not do his job with. Okay? He is the face of the problem. That's why he hasn't been at the border. And there are certain steps he could take to do this without all this extra funding. If we build a bigger, larger bureaucracy of judges and lawyers and facilities, where's it going to end? Do you think it's going to go away next year? I don't think so. So I'm not in favor of giving him any more money at this stage.
Okay.
Saying no to the funding. I don't think the offset question is real.
Can we cut the president's salary? I'm just wondering.
Okay, the lady with the orange dress right here.
It was very similar to that question, but just because this to Elisa's question, but even if the supplemental funding is because we all know the president's request is not going to pass, the 3.7, everyone has indicated that's a little too high, but even if it's half of what the president has requested, or even a quarter, because the speaker has made it clear he does want to do something. The Appropriations Committee chairman has said there should be additional funding and not necessarily pair that with the current appropriations process, because the agencies do need the money now. Some could run out of money as early as next month.
You know, we would all have to look at a credible request. Right now, you are talking about a request that is not credible, which is the president's request. If somebody comes up with a credible request, I will look at it, I will analyze it, and we can decide whether it needs to be offset, whether it doesn't need to be offset. We do have a crisis at the border, and we have to figure out how to fix this problem, but a lot of it can be fixed with current funding and can be fixed with a president that is actually willing to enforce the law and send a message to the people of South and Central America that we're not going to allow this to happen. But he's unwilling to do this. Remember how he has been playing games with this issue since the first year he was in office. He promised the Hispanic community that he was going to do, the first thing he was going to do was border reform and immigration reform. He spent 2 years with a Democratic Congress. He did absolutely nothing about the issue. As soon as we get elected, it becomes his #1 issue, and he has a bill that he supports that nobody in the House wants to vote on the Republican side, and he continues to play games with this issue. Then he does DACA on his own, and he does all these different things. He has invited the problem that we have at the border. He needs to start taking responsibility. He needs to start doing something about it, and then we in Congress can then address those issues if he's going to be responsible and with his duties as President of the United States.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes today's event. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all your questions, but thank you for attending today's conversation with conservatives. Thank you very much.